These are the caramel apples that you'll find in grocery stores in the United States around the fall, winter time, and they are these amazing apples that are covered in caramel and peanut. And although they only cost about $2 each, which isn't too bad, I just think the quality is lacking and I want to try to DIY them. The one thing I noted about the lack of quality is the apples. They are usually a lot older, so they're a bit mushy, and they stopped using green apples, which just gave them a sour kick that they don't have anymore. Unfortunately, I could not find green apples anywhere, so I went with pink ladies, which I think have a bit of a sour tinge. Now, the first step in the recipe is to add these sticks, and all of the recipes I referenced said to use cake pop sticks, and I grabbed some that were a bit longer. That way they'd be easier to dip with. And I fought the apple, and I don't know if it was the apple or me that was too strong, but the popsicle stick bent immediately. Now, obviously, that is not going to work for this process, so I went ahead and grabbed two more things. I grabbed shorter, thicker cake pop sticks, and then I also grabbed popsicle sticks. Because the recipes reference cake pop sticks, I went ahead and tried those out first, but again, they just do not withstand the weight of the apple, even when I push them in even further, so I just opted for the popsicle sticks, which I knew could handle more weight. Now, this is just me attempting to make these, but if you're watching this as a reference as to whether or not you can do this, just know that you should opt for popsicle sticks. Don't even bother with cake pop sticks. Also, kind of a forewarning, but it's kind of low-key a struggle to get the popsicle sticks into the apple, and I feel like I want to say I'm not weak, but maybe I am, but I went ahead and tossed out all of the cake pop sticks, and with that, these guys are all ready for the next step. There are only 2 ingredients in this recipe. There's only apples and the caramel, so now the next step is obviously the caramel. I'm adding in half a cup of water, a cup and a third of sugar, and then also a teaspoon of salt. I wish I had gone in with more salt because then it would have been like a salted caramel apple, which totally would have been so up my alley. I would say, you know what, I'll save it for next time, but after you watch the rest of this video, you'll see why there's probably not going to be a next time. The process of making the caramel is probably only like 30 minutes. You just start off by dissolving everything in the water, and once it's dissolved, you just let it chill for 9 minutes and boil until it turns light golden. The recipes also require that you use a candy thermometer. However, as I'm using this, we will find out that mine is probably broken because I followed it to a T and it was just not right. But after 9 minutes of letting it sit, it finally hit golden brown. So now I am going to add in a cup and 2 tablespoons of heavy cream, and this is when it will start to just bubble up and thicken. Or so I thought. For some reason, my first attempt right here, the sugar separated from the cream and it just became a liquid. I don't know if it just cooled it down too quickly or what, but eventually I was able to let it sit for a longer time and then it got to that bubbly stage. At this point, you're supposed to stir constantly for the next 7 minutes until the thermometer says 250, and after that, you take it off the heat. This is what my caramel is looking like. I needed to cool it to 212 degrees before working with the apples, which I let it do. As you can see, that thermometer now says around 200. After that, I went ahead and grabbed the apples out of the fridge. They had been chilling up until now, and I am going to just bring out a cutting board so that I can place them onto here after I dip them. I did not have any technique whatsoever for dipping the apples, so I just stuck them straight into the pot and started to dip. They said that 200 degrees should be good, okay, but it is still very, very hot. I burnt my hand on everything, but I did realize I needed to rearrange everything because I was just not getting the leverage I needed because the caramel had gotten so thick. Now I'm contemplating if I'm just weak, but I went ahead and just used the spatula and just tried to dip it in there, but then I realized it was probably better if I just tilted the pot over because it was just way too thick. Eventually, I managed to start to get a coat to stick on the apple, and as I was working it, I realized something had happened, as if this process hadn't gone wrong enough. I was realizing that the caramel was just way too hot and it was cooking the apple. All of those bubbles forming are literally the apple going as it pushed out the steam from it being cooked. All of these findings are me from hindsight. At the time, I was like, nope, this is perfectly good, perfectly normal, and I went ahead and coated another apple in this bad caramel. I also want to point out that this was supposed to coat 8 to 12 small apples, but it managed to coat 2.5. Also, there was no dripping of caramel, which is supposed to happen with the normal recipe. I was happy with the results. I let them sit and cool for a bit, and then I decided, you know what? maybe I could add pecans to one of these, because the other ones have peanuts as the coating, and I don't have peanuts, but I do have pecans. I tried to roll them in the pecans, and I'll just let past me just explain it better than I could.
Nope, literally not picking them up. Oh.
Oh, indeed, because I had made a hard caramel, but let's try to taste it anyways. Let's start off with a little ASMR of my hard caramel apple.
That is, rock solid.
But I'm gonna go ahead and slice it and put my teeth at risk. In case you missed it, here's a slow-mo. Yeah, I'm no genius, but I don't think it's supposed to do that. I did some investigating, and it's really interesting. It's kind of like oobleck, where it's soft, but also still cracks.
Ew, I made a Heath bar.
As soon as I insulted it, it decided to take revenge and fall into the crack behind my desk. At least the apple was salvageable. I got a slice of normal apple, but there, again, some of it is chewy and some of it just shatters. But this is definitely a fail, so let's try again. For this attempt, I am going to follow the same exact instructions, except this time I am not trusting my candy thermometer. I added my 1/2 cup water, 1 1/3 cup sugar, and 1 teaspoon of salt. I stirred it all until it was dissolved and then let it do its thing for 9 minutes until it was golden brown. Once it was golden brown, I added the cup and 2 tablespoons of heavy cream, and look at this time it actually bubbled properly. Now I'm going to follow the steps of just keep stirring it for the next 7 minutes until it hits 250, which I am not trusting. I went ahead and did 215. Once it hit the temperature, it got really dark brown, which was a little alarming, but I took it off the heat and it's now time to coat the apple. Now, the first thing you're probably thinking when you look at that caramel is, wow, that looks burnt, but trust me, it's not. I took a bunch of taste tests off camera and it tasted really good. I also decided to do like a drip on the apple to just test if it was too liquidy, and thankfully it was starting to stick, so I went ahead and just coated the entire apple. I knew that I was on the right path because when I tilted the pot over and started to roll the apple in it, it was coating it evenly. There were no lumps, there were no bumps, and there were no bubbling from cooked apple. The only con to the correct caramel texture is that I basically became a rotisserie chicken twirler, or cooker, whatever they're called, because I just had to keep twirling the apple to make sure it stayed completely coated and it dripped properly. I also felt like I didn't let it cool down enough because the coat was just completely sliding off, so I went in and did a couple more coats and let them cool, and then I just did not have the patience to be a rotisserie chicken twirler, so eventually I just chucked it into the freezer. Okay, I didn't actually chuck it into the freezer because the caramel was way too liquid and would have just gotten everywhere. I ended up holding it in the freezer, ended up being a rotisserie chicken in the freezer, and I was like, yeah, no, let me just hold it by hand and clean up the rest of the caramel. Eventually, the apple cooled enough to where I could put it on the counter, and I went ahead and poured all of the caramel into a container because even though I ran out of apples to dip it in, I do think it would be perfect for dipping apple slices in, and honestly, this is probably the way I would go from now on. I don't even like the apple on a stick concept. Like, to have to decore the apple before you eat it, yeah, no, why not just put it in a container and dip apple slices? Now, while my DIY apple cooled, I thought I would taste test the store-bought one. As you can see, it is a thinner caramel and it's got all of those peanuts, but the caramel is actually liquidy and the same consistency as the one I just made. Again, I have to point out the apple. It is an old, not Granny Smith apple, and it's very mushy, which is why I just feel like it doesn't hit the spot. Now let's taste test my apple. Yeah, I should not have put that down on the counter, but again, I am just impatient. This is my second attempt in the same day. I have carpal tunnel. My hands were just not handling this well, but I thought maybe I could get it to solidify by rolling it into the pecans, and I was like, these are huge. But instead of doing the normal thing of chopping them finely, I was like, you know what, let me just break a few with my fingers, and that resulted in a very ugly apple. Ugly or not, it's what's on the inside that matters, so let's taste test. So I went ahead and just sliced the piece off, and thankfully no shattering, and the caramel stayed intact. Also, from that cut, you could hear the crispiness of that apple, and yes, it was a very crunchy apple, but I also wanted to just show that that caramel is just sliding in a similar way, so I know that when the apple completely cooled, it would be perfect. And perfect it was. I took a bite on camera and it was phenomenal. It was a little warm because the caramel hadn't cooled, but off camera right now as I'm eating it, it is also phenomenal. This has been a long journey, and I just want to take us through all of the apples to just walk through the comparisons. This one is the store-bought one. The caramel's a lot lighter. It is covered in nuts, and it is a smaller, not Granny Smith apple. My first attempt was a Pink Lady apple with a very hard caramel, and my second attempt was also a Pink Lady apple, but with a softer, correctly textured caramel. Also a very messy, inconsistent coating of pecans. Of the three, my second attempt is my favorite as it has a crunchy apple and a great caramel with a toffee flavor and great texture. And I'm off to snack on it now.